She left them with nothing. No note. No warning. Just vanished, leaving a wheelchair-bound husband and 3 hungry kids behind. For 10 years, they raised themselves in the shadow of her absence. No birthdays. No holidays. Just survival. But then she came back, not with love or regret, but with a lawyer, demanding the only thing they had left. What happened next wasn't justice, but it wasn't exactly murder either. This is the story of a mother who walked away, and a daughter who finally made sure she couldn't walk back in. In the summer of 2012, Marquita Ellis left her home in Eastwood, Ohio, and never came back. She was 32 years old, married, and the mother of 3. Her husband, Deontay Ellis, had been in a wheelchair for 6 months following a construction site accident that left him paralyzed from the waist down. The injury was sudden, the compensation barely enough to cover hospital bills, and the transition to life with a disability had been difficult for the entire household. But no one expected what came next. On June 18th, Deontay woke up to silence. Marquita's side of the bed was empty. Her closet half cleared. Her phone disconnected. Her social media accounts were deactivated by evening. She left behind 3 children, Damon, age 11, Kyra, 8, and Zion, 5, without so much as a note. No custody battle. No warning. No goodbye. Marquita had left with her boss from the local insurance firm where she worked part-time. The man, married with 2 teenage sons, had filed for divorce and moved out of his home in Toledo. The 2 were seen together at a hotel off I-75. She had chosen a new life, one with no kids, no responsibility, and no reminder of the husband she now referred to as dead weight. Back in Eastwood, Deontay was left scrambling. Adjusting to life in a wheelchair was already overwhelming. Now he had to manage school drop-offs, meals, and medical appointments. The children didn't fully grasp what had happened at first. For weeks, they clung to the belief that she might return. But when Marquita's sister came by to collect some of her clothes without offering a word of explanation, reality started to sink in. By the end of 2012, the Ellis family no longer waited for Marquita to return. Her absence had hardened into routine, and the home she left behind slowly shifted into something unrecognizable from what it once was. Deontay did his best, but the reality was unkind. Confined to a wheelchair with limited mobility and increasing nerve pain, he couldn't cook proper meals or chase after Zion when he wandered too close to the street. He struggled to navigate public transportation for school meetings or food assistance appointments. The bathroom became a hazard zone. The basement flooded twice, and no one came to fix it. But through it all, he never spoke a word against Marquita, not to the kids, not to the neighbors, not even to her sister, who never visited again. The burden fell naturally on the children, with Kyra shouldering most of it. At just 9, she began waking early to pack lunches, usually peanut butter sandwiches and crackers. She taught herself to boil noodles and microwave canned vegetables. On laundry days, she stood on a stool to reach the settings on the old top-loader washing machine. If Deontay had an accident or couldn't get up, she helped clean him, quietly and without complaint. Her teachers noticed the change. So did the school nurse. But reports to child services led nowhere. The family wasn't being abused. They were just surviving. Zion, the youngest, stopped talking in class. His drawings changed, from sunny skies and trees to blank houses and black stick figures. He kept to himself, clinging to a small red blanket long after most kids his age had let go of such comforts. His speech regressed. Teachers marked it down as trauma, but there was no counseling available beyond school hours, and no guardian able to take him there if there had been. Damon, on the other hand, grew louder, more angry. At 12, he started cutting class. By 13, he was sneaking out at night and getting into fights with older kids in the neighborhood. A school counselor once described him as a boy who looks like he's been robbed of his youth. He never talked about his mother, but on the one-year anniversary of Marquita's disappearance, he stole a photograph of her from Deontay's drawer and burned it behind the shed. Despite it all, the family remained intact. Just barely. Their meals came from food pantries, dented cans of corn, instant rice, boxes of powdered milk. Clothes came from donation bins or sympathetic church ladies who dropped bags off on the porch. Birthdays were acknowledged with quiet hugs. Christmases meant socks and secondhand books. The heat went out twice during the winter of 2014. Damon broke into an abandoned house nearby to steal a space heater. No one reported it. Deontay raised them with a calm, stern presence. He enforced curfews, demanded respect, and insisted that they never steal food from stores, no matter how hungry they were. But as his body declined, his control slipped further each year. By 2016, the family had faded from neighborhood gossip. People assumed Marquita had died or was strung out in another city. The Elisas were just another forgotten black family fighting to stay afloat in a home no one wanted anymore. But inside, the silence was heavy. It spoke of betrayal, exhaustion, and the slow erosion of innocence. The children weren't growing up. They were surviving in the wreckage of a choice someone else made. In the spring of 2022, Marquita Ellis returned to Eastwood like a woman untouched by consequence. She pulled up in a rented silver Infiniti, wearing high heels and a blazer sharp enough for a courtroom. Her braids were fresh. The children she abandoned hadn't seen her in 10 years, but she didn't come for them. She came for the house. By that time, Deontay had spent over a decade raising 3 children alone from a chair pushed against a failing foundation. The paint on the house had long peeled. The backyard fence leaned sideways. The roof had been patched 3 different times by Damon and a neighbor using scraps from old construction jobs. Yet to Marquita, it represented equity. Something to liquidate. A last grasp at leverage after the man she left for, her former boss, lost everything in a failed investment scheme and left her in a 1-bedroom apartment in Sandusky. Her return wasn't announced. She showed up on a Thursday, uninvited and without warning. She knocked on the front door like nothing had happened. Kyra opened it, then closed it without a word. But it wasn't over. Marquita came back again 2 days later. This time, with documents, old mortgage statements, partial ownership records, and the original deed from Deontay's grandfather, which had never been officially transferred after his passing. On paper, Marquita still had a claim. The paperwork had never been finalized. Her name was still attached to the property title, and she planned to act on it. Deontay asked to speak with her alone. They sat in the kitchen, 2 people aged by 2 completely different kinds of time. He asked her, calmly, to leave it alone. Reminded her of everything she'd walked away from. Told her the children had nowhere else to go. She disagreed. Marquita left that evening as casually as she came. No apology. No softness. Just a verbal warning that she had spoken with a real estate agent and intended to move forward with listing the house. When Kyra asked her how she could possibly do that, she answered plainly, "It's not personal. It's business." The next week, a legal notice arrived by mail. She was moving fast. The letter confirmed her intent to file for partition of the property. If granted, the home would be sold and the proceeds split. It didn't matter that Deontay had maintained it for 10 years. It didn't matter that the children had grown up there. It didn't matter that she had abandoned everything. Marquita wanted what was left. And this time, she wasn't walking away. Deontay broke down. The man who had taught them how to manage with rationed water, who stayed calm during winter power outages and emergency room visits, who once rolled himself to a parent-teacher conference during a thunderstorm, cried openly at the thought of losing the only space he had managed to protect. Damon didn't say a word. He stood up and walked out the front door. No shirt. No phone. Just vanished into the night. He came back hours later, his face swollen from what looked like a fight. He went straight to the back of the house and stayed there, alone, sitting on the cracked brick wall Marquita used to plant flowers beside. He didn't answer when Kyra called out. He didn't come in for dinner. Kyra stayed inside, quiet as always. But her silence had changed. It no longer felt like avoidance, it felt like calculation. That morning, she'd walked to the far end of the block and knocked on Mr. Paulson's door, the retired school janitor who lived alone. She asked if she could borrow the bat he kept by his porch chair. When he asked what for, she said, "Practice." He handed it over without hesitation. No one had ever known Kyra to lie. That night, Marquita arrived again, unannounced. She parked in the same spot on the curb, left the engine running, and knocked twice before walking in like she still lived there. She brought no papers this time. Just her voice, sharp and short, accusing Deontay of stalling, threatening to file court action within 48 hours. The kids stayed out of the room. No one answered her back. She left 15 minutes later. The house was silent after she drove off. Damon sat on the porch with his legs stretched, arms folded, eyes locked on the street. Kyra joined him, barefoot. They didn't speak. Just watched the road. Watched the taillights fade. Watched the silence settle over the block. Inside, Deontay took his medication and wheeled himself to bed. By 10:41 p.m., the house was dark. Except for the back door. Marquita would later return claiming she forgot something. On the morning of June 11, 2022, Marquita Ellis was found behind the old shed at the rear of the property, face down in wet dirt, arms curled awkwardly beneath her torso. Blunt force trauma to the head was immediately suspected. The scene was chaotic, but the trail wasn't long. 10 feet from her body, beneath a pile of old tarp and wood scraps, was the bat. Aluminum. Dented. Caked in blood. The coroner's preliminary examination indicated at least 3 strikes to the head and shoulder region, with one to the left temple believed to be the fatal blow. Her purse was untouched. No signs of sexual assault. No indication of forced entry or robbery. This wasn't random. The Ellis home became an instant crime scene. Patrol officers taped off the perimeter while homicide investigators conducted interviews. Inside, Deontay sat stunned, repeatedly asking what had happened, what exactly they meant by, "she's gone." Kyra sat across from him, motionless. Zion cried quietly in the hallway, holding a blanket. Damon wasn't home when police arrived. He was found 2 hours later at Lincoln Field, asleep on the concrete bleachers. His hands were scraped. His shirt stained. His hoodie bore a deep red smear on the hem. Officers approached him slowly, asked him to stand, then handcuffed him without resistance. At the station, Damon's fingerprints were matched to the bat. His phone location data placed him in the backyard between 11:17 p.m. and 12:03 a.m., exactly within the estimated time of death. A neighbor's exterior security camera captured grainy footage of someone near the Ellis fence line around midnight. While the footage lacked clarity, the height and build were consistent with Damon. When detectives asked if he'd been home that night, he answered, "I was outside. I didn't go nowhere." Some of the detectives noted how quickly everything had come together, how clean the timeline looked. Almost too clean. The weapon wasn't hidden, it was tossed carelessly. The camera footage was convenient. Damon hadn't even attempted to explain away the evidence. 6 weeks before Damon Ellis was set to stand trial for the murder of his mother, everything changed. It started with a private conversation between Kyra and Deontay in the living room of the Eastwood apartment they had relocated to after the house was released back to the county. Deontay, now thinner and visibly weaker, had been pushing for closure, Something that could explain why his oldest son was behind bars while his daughter drifted through days in total emotional silence. On that Thursday afternoon, Kyra asked him to close the blinds. Then she spoke. She told him she was the one who killed Marquita. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She laid it out with an unsettling calm. She had planned it for days, ever since the first letter from Marquita's lawyer arrived. It wasn't a crime of passion, she explained. It was purpose. And Damon didn't help her commit it. He only helped cover it up after the fact. Deont, stunned and silent, called their defense attorney that same evening. The lawyer, initially dismissive, changed tone quickly once Kyra repeated her statement in front of him, with detail, sequence, and unwavering composure. She knew the timing of the murder, the exact placement of the tarp behind the shed, where the bat had been hidden prior to the attack. She remembered Marquita's last words. She repeated them verbatim, "I'll sell the house even if it kills you to watch." Kyra said she didn't even flinch. The attorney recorded her confession. Within 48 hours, he submitted the new information to the court. The judge temporarily halted Damon's pretrial hearings. The prosecution, blindsided, began the process of re-evaluating the case. Fingerprint placement on the bat, previously believed to be evidence of the swing, was reconsidered in light of Damon's statement that he only moved the weapon afterward. A second set of partial prints, once considered incidental, now took center stage. They belonged to Kyra. Damon was released on bond. The media barely had time to adjust their headlines before Kyra Ellis, 18 years old, was booked for second-degree murder. Her mugshot showed the same calm she carried at the police station the morning her mother was found. No smirk, no tears, just stillness. In the courtroom, prosecutors were met with a challenge they hadn't anticipated. Kyra didn't contest the charges. She didn't request leniency. During her arraignment, she spoke only once, when asked to confirm her name. But it was her demeanor that unnerved the room. The same stoicism she'd carried for years had now been recast in an entirely different light. What people once interpreted as quiet strength now looked like detachment. What seemed like obedience now read as control. Public opinion split fast. Some couldn't reconcile the image of a soft-spoken teen who cared for her disabled father and younger brother with the brutality of what she had done. Others believed the trauma of being abandoned and then threatened with displacement again had driven her to a breaking point. But legal analysts were unanimous. Her confession was irrefutable and her mental state, though emotionally distant, was coherent. That sentence became both indictment and justification, depending on who was reading it. Behind the scenes, Deontay Ellis remained quiet. He did not make public statements. He did not attend interviews. The trial was set. The narrative had shifted. As Kyra's legal team prepared for trial, they requested every document, photo, and paper related to the Ellis household. The goal was to establish a clear picture of the years following Marquita's departure, her absence, Deontay's efforts, the psychological weight of survival. With boxes stacked in the corner of the attorney's office, Kyra volunteered to help sort through them one weekend in mid-August. Most of it was school papers, medical bills, unpaid utilities, and weathered photo albums. But in the bottom of a water-damaged file crate was a faded brown composition notebook. No label. Just tape on the spine and the initials describbled in ink. It was Deontay's journal. The first few pages were notes, grocery lists, reminders about therapy appointments, rough schedules for the kids' school pickups. Then, in the middle, the handwriting changed. Less structured. Less controlled. And the words became something else entirely. It started with a date, October 12, 2011. Then, she pushed me. That's the truth. She didn't mean for me to fall like that, but she knew where I was standing. Kyra kept reading. The pages unraveled a secret Deontay had kept buried for over a decade. His paralysis hadn't come from a construction accident as everyone believed. That was a lie he'd created, one he maintained in doctors' offices, in insurance filings, in conversations with social workers and neighbors. The real story was far more personal. Deontay and Marquita had gotten into a heated argument in the stairwell of their old house. She had been seeing another man for months, and when Deontay confronted her with evidence, she lashed out. In the midst of the shouting, she shoved him. He lost his footing, fell backwards, hit the edge of the third step hard enough to shatter a vertebra. The next day, she apologized, then left him at the hospital 3 days later and never came back. Deontay had written, "She begged me not to tell the kids. Said it was an accident. Said if I made her look like a monster, they'd never recover. So I didn't. I just told everyone it happened at the job site. It was easier." Kyra read the entire journal without pause. She made copies of the pages and handed them to the defense attorney that same afternoon. The discovery altered everything. The defense now had evidence that the woman Kyra killed wasn't just a negligent mother or a selfish former partner. She had a history of physical violence that permanently changed the course of her family's life. And Deontay, the man who raised 3 children from a wheelchair, had absorbed the blame quietly for years in order to preserve the image of a woman who never returned the favor. When asked about the journal, Deontay confirmed its authenticity. He gave a sworn statement verifying the account. For Kyra, the journal wasn't vindication. It was confirmation. Marquita hadn't just abandoned them. She had broken the foundation they were built on, then tried to return and finish what was left. And the man she left in a chair had chosen silence not out of weakness, but out of a father's belief that his children deserved to believe their mother had once been human. The truth, once hidden on staircases and in hospital files, was now part of the record. And the lens on this case was forever changed. Kyra Ellis's trial began on November 14, 2022, at the Franklin County Courthouse. Kyra took the stand on the third day. Her testimony was brief, direct, and without theatrics. She admitted to everything. As the trial reached its closing arguments, the prosecution leaned on the cold reality: a planned killing, a confession, a cover-up. They called it vigilantism. The defense countered with one phrase: survival bred in silence. They argued that the system had already failed this family once, when no one checked on them after Marquita left, when no one investigated the origins of Deontay's injury, when 3 children raised themselves under the weight of their mother's abandonment. Deliberations took 31 hours. Kyra Ellis was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison with eligibility for parole after 5. Damon was not charged further. His cooperation and Kyra's full confession cleared him of active participation in the murder. After the trial, Deontay sold what remained of the Ellis house. The money paid off legal fees and secured a place for him in an assisted housing facility near downtown Columbus. He no longer lived alone. Zion moved in with an aunt. Counseling was arranged through a court-ordered social service grant. Damon began working full-time at a local auto shop and visited Kyra every Saturday. On the final day of the trial, when asked if she had any last words, Kyra faced the judge and said, "She didn't raise me. Pain did." The courtroom didn't clap. It didn't gasp. It simply listened. Because by then, everyone knew this was never a story about justice. It was about what's left behind when the law shows up too late.